So this this is a as an introduction to another letter of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, defending Chassidut. I want to read sort of what he's reacting to, which is a letter from the Vilna Gaon. And this is right, it's about a year before the Vilna Gaon dies. This is 1897. I think he died in 1898. No, sorry, 1797. And I think he died in 1798. This is just the beginning of the Hebrew year. And I think what's interesting to sort of ask ourselves, and we've seen a couple other letters from the 1790s, but of course, this is 25 years since the first letters, and to sort of ask ourselves what's changed, what seems different, what are the criticisms now, are they different than they were 25 years ago? And first paragraph's mostly introduction. The Gaon there's sort of this resurgence. Every few years, what happens is things calm down, and then there's kind of a resurgence. That was in the 1780s, now again in the 1790s. One time we saw that it was maybe a result of the person going around and saying that the Gaon had recanted. And here it seems to be that there are other cities that are asking about this, asking the Gaon. Where they're writing in and saying the Chasidim are growing. And okay, so he says, who can understand this? A generation that curses its father doesn't bless its mother. So what does that mean? In other words, it seems like he's saying the Chasidim don't listen to the past. They're not respectful of their quote father and mother, meaning the past. They're making change. Hirbu lifshoa kenegdam. They sin against their ancestors. Ketaf soreret. They turn aside their shoulder. The libam hekaved, in their heavy heart. The datam maus betov b'charbara. They choose evil. Avru Torah chalfuchok. They violate the Torah. Yitziram amel alechok. V'yigalu panim b'Torah shelo kalacha. They make decisions in the Torah that are not halachic. Gadlat tza'akatam, their cry is great. Kivrakim ratzu. This is a pasuk. These are quoted from psukim. Although the note here says maybe this is referring to their crying out during prayer. Yagia tumatam b'shula hakaved nechusha. Chazot kasha kol davar shebekdusha kilot taharhu. They're impure. Moshe Marashi Achusi Bris Chadasha. And in the place of the Torah of Moshe, they have made a new covenant. Now, the Brit Chadasha usually refers to Christianity, a new covenant. So this is pretty radical. He's seeing them really as a break from Judaism. Asot HaMezimata Harabim B'Beit Hashem. They are filling the house of God with zima, which means like sexual immorality. Basar kodesh yavar me'alehem. Yarvu me'alehem. They, that could be a quote from Akina, maybe. Which part? New covenant. Oh, from the kinna of maybe God has made a new covenant. That's why God is forsaking his old covenant. could be, although that would be sort of a more positive take. That would be blaming and similar. Uvasar Kodesh Evrim Alehem. So in the note here, it says that this is a reference to onanism, that he seems to be accusing them of sexual immorality. And they're saying things that are not halachic when they say yakar b'nei Hashem darkam, that their way is beloved before God, but the word yakar is also the letters of keri, which means ejaculation. So there seems to be, at least the notes here understand this to all be a criticism. I remember there was an earlier criticism of sodomy. Is there anything to this? I assume not. It was this Evan Makir Tizak. V'samim yalbashu kadeirot al ateret atorah cholav agvar shveilem rachnis atzmam b'shem chasidim. Dor ma ramu be'inav milim litzad ilai yimalelu elel hechi Yisrael. They say, this is your God, O Israel. Now that, of course, is a reference to the worship of the golden calf. Upasek ba'atama chaya ud kulam. And in the verse, you give life to all of them. Verse from Nehemiah. Now, the notes here are important because this is becoming a Kabbalistic fight, what the Gaon is going into now. So in the Tanya, it talks about Tamachayet Kulam, that God, right, the Hasidic Kabbalistic idea of God's presence in the world is that God doesn't just create the world is a divine emanation, constant divine emanation, and everything has godliness in it. That's the Hasidic take. So according to the note here, he's arguing with that. And he's saying, Hagra yachol hayaladat al pirzeh shel ata l'chayet kulam lav dafka min Tanya. The Tanya said, Ba'atama chayet kulam, that's a book by Rabbi Shneur Zalman V'Yadi, you have given life to all of them, meaning that's a way of articulating that the world is a manifestation of God, or the world is a projection of God's being. Devarim elu kvar muvaim b'igrato shel Rabbi Menachem Mendel Mivitebsk shenishlacha me'eretz Yisrael l'Chasidim Borussia v'nishnas tafkuf mem ches. So he's saying this was also mentioned in a letter from Rabbi Menachem Mendel Mivitebsk, which we looked at. Nios Yodea Devar Hashem Ayadei Neviim Pasuk Kol Nikra B'Shmi L'Chodi Baratav Yitzharav Afasitab Shehu Malei Kol Haaretz Kibodo. That the verse in Navi, that everything is for my honor and in my name, says God, that is a reference to Malei Kol Haaretz Kibodo, the Hasidic notion that the world is entirely filled with God's glory, that there is nothing else besides God, right? And this creates a sort of very basic theological problem, which is if you believe that God is infinite and that there's nothing else besides God, so how does anything else exist? How do we exist? How does the world exist? How can there be any kind of dualism, any kind of relationship with God? How can there be any kind of anything? So the Chasidim did stress this notion of ein od milvado. There's nothing else besides God. Malei kol haaretz kavod. The world is filled with God's glory. And they held that all physicality is also spiritual. The Rabbi Shneur Zalman V'Yadi writes in his book, in the Tanya and in Shari Yichud B'Emunah, that everything, even inanimate objects, have a divine life force, or else they wouldn't exist. That everything is, it's not that God creates the world, it's that God is constantly creating the world. Shu pasuk b'atam chayes kulam v'hu galut hashchina mistateret b'chol dvarim yigim, and that there's this exile of the divine presence, and it's in everything. Okay. So that's a very fundamental Hasidic idea. And the Gaon will disagree with that. Obviously, this kind of panentheism is easily a slippery slope to pantheism or to, maybe idolatry. Harei haroim haraim. Okay. Where is that note? So I'll call Eitzuchol Evan. They say, this is your God, O Israel, every tree and every stone. They say, this is your God, O Israel, right? In other words, he's saying the Chasidim are like those worshiping the golden calf. So in the note here, it says, the Gaon seems to be alluding to the words that are in the Tzavad HaRivash. Tzavad HaRivash is the Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov left an ethical will. That's the ethical will of the Baal Shem Tov. Zekla as follows. Here's what Baal Shem Tov writes. Zekla gadol b'chol ma sheyesh ba'olam yesh nitzotzim hakadoshim. That there's a general rule that in everything in the world there are holy sparks. There's nothing that is free of divine sparks, even trees and rocks. Every action a person does, even a sin a person does, there are sparks of the breaking of the divine vessels that have lodged in the physical. Mahi nitzotos hashvira hi hateshuva. And what these are, these sparks, that is the answer that's being trying to be given. So if you say that the Vilna Gaon read the Tanya, before he wrote this letter, Hasharas Duvnov, as Duvnov, who compiled the other book that we were reading, says, right, so I guess there's a scholarly argument about whether the Vilna Gaon had read the Tanya first. Or maybe he just saw some pages of it, as other scholars argue. So then we could say that he is thinking, he's responding to what's in Shara Yichud B'Amunah that I had mentioned in Chelik Beis Perek Aleph. The second part of the Tanya, called the Gate of Yichud B'Amunah, where he says, Shagam, as I just mentioned, Shagam Medome Mamish, that even in things that are inanimate, there is a spiritual life force. Okay, so the Gaon is having, so now it's interesting, right? In other words, this is not about you've changed the nusach. This is not about you doing headstands. This is not about you dance too much and you're too joyous. This is something totally different, right? This is the Vilna Gaon arguing in theology, in Kabbalah, with Chassidut. That Chassidut has this sense of God being really immanent in the world, and the Vilna Gaon is comparing that to worshiping the golden calf. And they interpret wrongly the verse, blessed is God's glory from his place. So let's see this note. That's a quote from Yechezkel. Yitachen shitchavin ledivrei Rav Shner Zalman sham b'chelik aleph sefer shel Beinonim. So it seems that the Vilna Gaon is referring here to something that Rav Shner Zalman of Liadi wrote in the beginning of the Tanya, in Perek 42. V'hinei kol adam Yisrael yamishia. Every Jew is what they are. Kishisponim bazeh ashar gedola b'chol yom. Mamish when a human being meditates on the fact that God fills up the world, so then that becomes true. He says, this note also says you can look at what Rabbi Chaim Volozhiner says. Now, Rabbi Chaim Volozhiner was the main student of the Vilna Gaon. Says in Nefesh Chaim, Aval Shavti v'ra'iti shekacha yafa lahem lefi darasehem, aval ata hein yamim rabim lelo moreh. It used to be that they were good generations, and now we have a generation without teachers. Chol derech ish yashar beinav, v'lo chan netilas tichlo. Everybody says theologically whatever they want. Chol yetzer machshavos lev ha'adam alei rak la'of v'machshavto el kol asher yitnu sichlo. Everybody, same idea, says what they want. Ba'ola al kulam. And the worst of it all is Shazah Toras Kol Adam V'Nasa Mashal Gam B'Fi Ksilim Lemor Halav B'Chol Makom B'Chol Davar Lukas Gomer. The worst thing Or Chaim Blazner says is that people say, and they think it's based on the Torah, that God is in every place and that everything has divinity in it. And they spend all of their time focusing on that. Such that even they're teaching children this, that everything you do, you have to have in mind that there's divinity in everything. And the Chaim Blazner says this is a bad thing. You have to be very careful of not doing this. To guard your soul. If God forbid, because this could lead us to doing certain things that are forbidden. You could uproot the entire Torah from this idea. I assume means worship idols. He's saying it's not just that you might worship idols. He's saying it's that you might permit sins, because you're going to say to yourself, well, everything has divinity in it. Everything can be used for good, even sin. Now, that was really, that's Frankism. This is the Kabbalistic basis for Shabtai Tzvi and for Jacob Frank. So there's clearly a worry that the Chasidim are doing this. For instance, you might think about words of Torah even in a bathroom, because you're convinced that God is everywhere and everything is God. Okay. So that's very interesting. So at least according to the notes here of the scholar, it seems that what the Vilna Gaon is referring to is that there's a big war between the Misnagdim and Chasidim about the nature of God's presence in the world. And the worry on the part of the... Now, it's funny. I think we've been so influenced by Chassidut, especially Chabad, because it's a Chassidut that is spread around, that if you ask, the average Orthodox Jew, do we believe there's divinity in everything? They'll say yes. But actually, that was a very radical move on the part of Chasidim. And it can lead you, according to Rabbi Shneur Zalman, according to the Vilna Gaon and Rabbi Chaim Blazner, to terrible sins. And, it's almost hard for us to think the opposite, because we're so used to accepting, I think, that is Jewish theology. They're shepherds, shivdo milibam mishpat chadash. They make a new way from their hearts. Olafin chadat. Make a new Torah. And their students drink it up, and the name of God it becomes cursed, becomes desecrated. Okay, so we'll continue with this next time. This is very interesting. I think that I think it's also interesting that it changes over time, right? That we were not seeing this early on, 25 years before, but now it's become, I think as the other criticisms have fallen away, you get more to something, a different kind of meat, theological. Okay, that's interesting.
Thank you. Thank you.